talked about in the previous decade. And what are those things? What are the things that Hitler, what are the most paramount things that Hitler cared about in terms of undoing the Versailles Treaty? So we're going to see him begin to pick that apart. Now, again, even before Hitler came to power, reparations had been basically dealt with. So they don't have that problem anymore. But one of the other things that they wanted to deal with was basically the foreign policy issues that the Treaty of Versailles imposed upon them. Now, one of them was basically that they could not remilitarize, that they were forbidden to have a navy, more than a few ships, token ships. They were not allowed to have an air force. They were not allowed to have a mechanized war machine, like armored tanks and stuff like that, right? No submarines. They weren't allowed to have a military force. And so basically Hitler in March of 1935 states to the world, Germany is no longer going to abide by the military restrictions laid out in the Treaty of Versailles. We're going to produce as many weapons as we want, just like other countries. And we're not going to follow the guidelines of the Versailles Treaty. And so, of course, you know, Britain and France and Italy, even Mussolini, who will later become his ally, are alarmed at this. They go and talk about it, and they do what? They don't do anything about it. And this is our first step towards appeasement, a policy that the Western democracies are going to follow. So this is one of those broad terms that you have to know and what it means. Appeasement, basically giving in exchange for peace. I remember seeing this political cartoon. I've had difficulty finding it, but it's Hitler in a bassinet, you know, suckling a bottle, you know, and Chamberlain and Daladier are kind of hovering over him, you know, and he's suckling on, you know, concessions, right? Basically the Munich Agreement, many of the things that they give in to that is named on the bottle. And basically that is appeasement. It's giving in exchange for peace. That's what you do to a baby, right? Baby cries, you give him a bottle. You do whatever you do to shut him up.
Last year, you leave him alone, let him cry himself out.
Thank you, Mr. Child Psychologist. You're not getting the political point here. Okay. So again, we're going to see a series of these, basically appeasing Hitler in exchange for peace. And I think to a certain degree, yes, they were doing this to avoid war. And to a certain extent, I think they also recognized, well, how long were we going to impose this? Is this forever, right? Well, you know, again, at some point, perhaps, you know, we'd have to give in to this. So should we have war over it? And at the same time, the Western democracies didn't want to go through World War I all over again. So they didn't take a strong stance here. Next. Of course, in that same year, later that year, Mussolini himself will invade Ethiopia. Another example of appeasement. Britain and France do nothing about this. Britain could have easily stopped this. Britain could have just put their navy at the Suez Canal and blocked Italian shipping from going to Somaliland, which is past the canal between there. But Britain had the power to basically stop this with very little difficulty. And they don't.
Sorry. Real quick.
Yes, everybody stare at her right now.
This isn't my pencil.
Okay.
Point and laugh. Come on, Henry. Point and laugh. It's not working.
Very good.
Very well.
Great. Okay.
This is my pencil. No, wait. Okay.
All right. So again, so Ethiopia, this little African country, and basically Mussolini returned to Ethiopia really to avenge an earlier humiliation. The Italians in 1895 invaded Ethiopia. They were repelled by the Ethiopians. So it's kind of like it's like an example, first example of a European power being driven off by a non-Western country. So again, Mussolini kind of returning to restore Italian honor. I mean, what is in Ethiopia? I mean, what value is it? In terms of a material sense.
You didn't change the ring. Obviously his wife. Or boyfriend.
Who else calls a husband?
Who else calls Mr. Morris?
Tax day's this Friday, next Friday.
That's right.
Yeah, my birthday's next week.
Okay. So again, the idea of restoring Italian honor, a new Roman Empire, the fulfillment of those kind of dreams, and really also knowing your opponent. You can beat non-Western countries that are not industrialized. And Italy, Italy is a country still, preparing for war under this fascist regime, and at the same time, they are not a first-rate power. Next. Again, the League condemns the attack, but does nothing once again. Of course, Haile Selassie will basically give his famous speech at the League of Nations there. Yeah. It's us today, it'll be you tomorrow. And of course, those words will be faithful. 5 years later, the Nazis will be overrunning Europe. Next. A year later, the Germans and the Italians will form what is called the Rome-Berlin Axis. And of course, 9 months later, the Japanese will join the Axis powers in forming the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo Axis. This will, again, be the term that we'll use to identify them during the war, the Axis powers versus the Allies. And so, again, we use the term Allies from World War I as well. We'll use that term for World War II also, the Allies and the Axis powers. Again, also the basis of this alliance, it was not necessarily that you were obligated to go fight the countries when World War II broke out and Germany invades Poland, Mussolini is not in the war at that point. He's off in his own little adventures and so forth, but they are not, in Albania. But, again, they will also begin to tie themselves together a little more closely. What's interesting is Hitler is going to overrun other countries. Italy will be a country, well, I'll talk about it later. Talk about the Holocaust. Next. We also see in this same year something else, a microcosm of World War II. What do I mean by that? A microcosm of World War II. The Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War really represents, in many ways, the whole thing that is going to play out in World War II in a small sense. Huh?
Skip the board. 5, 6.
Oh, well, you'll figure it out. And so, again, on a small scale, we can look at the Spanish Civil War and basically look at what really World War II also was on a small scale. For example, when the war breaks out, what is the war the forces of? What is going on here? What is the cause of this? Is Spain experiencing a lot of the same difficulties other countries were during the Great Depression? Yes. And what was happening to the political center in Spain?
It's dissolving.
It's dissolving. So you have the forces of the left and the forces of the right getting stronger, right? Now, on the forces of the right is a military leader by the name of Francisco Franco. Forget what his rank was. But nevertheless, he's going to lead the forces of the right. And he's going to adopt the kind of fascist banner. He's also going to be aided by both Germany and Italy on the right. So here, but on the left we see the Democratic Republic, the Republican forces, many of which are dominated by the political left. And who's going to come to the aid of the political left? The Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, and what is the Western democracies going to be doing? And the United States. Staying out of it. And so what we see here is the forces of communism, the forces of fascism, playing itself out on as its battlefield, Spain. And Franco's going to get a great deal of aid from both the Germans and the Italians. And in many ways, Hitler is trying out his new army, his new military. He's trying out his new Luftwaffe, that's the Air Force. He's trying out new weapon systems. He's trying out lots of new kinds of strategies that will be employed later on. And so the Spanish Civil War is going to be in many ways kind of practice for the big war that is coming in a couple years. And so in the end, Hitler will aid this man, Francisco Franco, a fascist, to power in Spain. And this man will be the one guy on the fascist forces that will politically survive World War II and remain in power in Spain for the next 30 years. So this guy will live out his life as a fascist dictator of Spain all the way until 1975. But nevertheless, he was brought to power with the help of Mussolini and Hitler in the late 1930s. Next. We also see in March of 36, and this probably should have been up here, but nevertheless here, the German troops enter the Rhineland. What is the significance of this? What was the purpose of the demilitarized zone in the Rhineland, at the end of World War I?
To protect France.
Protect France, to give France a buffer zone from attack, but also a zone in which they could invade to ensure the Versailles Treaty. And so in March of 36, Hitler actually told his commanders, listen, if you see any resistance at all, if you see the British, the English, or the French here make any move to stop us, pull back, okay? Don't let them, if they make a move, you guys get the hell out of there. So he's taking a real gamble here. He's gambling that the French and the British won't do anything about this. And so when he moves in with 40,000 troops into the Rhineland, what did the French and British do?
Nothing.
Well, they were alarmed. And again, in earlier agreements from the previous year, they stated that they were going to do something about it. And also Mussolini